Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump urges mediators to move fast as key Gaza peace talks begin. Israel continues to attack Gaza. As those delegations arrive in Egypt, the talks have just got underway in the last few minutes. In a shock move, France's Prime Minister resigns after just 3 weeks in office. More than 200 climbers remain trapped on the slopes of Mount Everest. We'll speak to one of the Sherpas involved with the rescues. And the Queen pays tribute to the author Dame Jilly Cooper, who's died at the age of 88. Hello and welcome to BBC News. Let's start in the Middle East, and indirect talks between Hamas and Israeli negotiators are reported to have started in the last few minutes in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. They're discussing President Trump's peace plan for Gaza. As part of the proposals, remaining Israeli hostages will be swapped for hundreds of Palestinians. Israel's military has continued its campaign in Gaza City. President Trump has urged all parties to move fast, warning that massive bloodshed would follow if the talks failed. Well, our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher has the latest for us in Jerusalem.
Matthew, this is the first phase of the Trump peace plan, which is to agree on the details of how to release the remaining Israeli hostages and also exchange them for Palestinian prisoners. So a lot of it is logistical details. For example, when they would be handed over, where, how the Red Cross would be involved, and the timing of it in particular, because as you mentioned, President Trump wants this to happen very quickly. It seems as if the living hostages, and it's believed there are 20 living hostages out of 48, will be able to be handed over quite quickly, people believe. The deceased will take much longer because the Hamas doesn't know where all of the bodies are, given the Israeli military offensive, given the destruction, given the rubble. So that will have to take longer than the prescribed 72 hours. So they'll be talking about that. They'll be requesting apparently heavy equipment and bulldozers to try to dig through and find the bodies and talk about how they would be returned. The other part of it, Matthew, is they're going to have to draw up a list of Palestinian prisoners that will be released. And according to the plan, 250 high-profile prisoners are on the list, and agreeing on on those names will be quite difficult because some of those have been accused of quite severe crimes, and some of them the Israelis see as quite a threat. But they are at the top of the list for Hamas because they are seen as a Palestinian part of the Palestinian resistance movement. So that will take, I think, quite a lot of back and forth. And the big question is whether they will be able to agree something that can be executed this week, as President Trump has requested. He is sending his envoys a little bit later, so these are kind of very technical talks as far as we understand, and we expect that his envoys will probably arrive midweek, probably on Wednesday.
Barbara, briefly, give me an idea of the mood in Israel and the pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu now.
Polls consistently show that around 70% of Israelis really want this war to end in exchange for the release of the hostages. And they have become very vocal about it, especially the families of the hostages. They have been organizing rallies. They have been issuing press releases urging Mr. Netanyahu to take this chance to bring their loved ones home. They have even today sent an urgent letter to the Committee of the Nobel Peace Prize, urging them to give a prize to President Trump for what he's doing, and that will be announced, that prize, at the end of the week.
That was Barbara Plett-Usher. Well, our Gaza correspondent Rushdie Abu-Alouf is in Istanbul. He outlined the challenges facing all sides in the coming days.
From the Egyptian and the Qataris, I think they have done already the maximum pressure on Hamas to come with this statement that is, just saying yes to those 2-3 points that they agree. But now it's the hard part where Hamas does not agree and they want more explanation from the Israelis. Well, today there was a meeting involving the Qataris and the Egyptian with all of the Hamas 11 members delegation, the biggest ever, arrived in Cairo since the beginning of the war, and Hamas raised concern about they believe that the Israelis only want the hostages and they might walk away from the negotiation after the first stage. That what Hamas want guarantee that Israel will not resume fighting from the Americans this time.
Well, Yusuf Munaya is head of the Palestine-Israel program at the Arab Center in Washington. I asked him just a short time ago how close or how far away we were to actually getting a deal.
Well, look, while there's been a number of announcements over the last several days and weeks in relation to this deal, I think the formula that we see today has very much been with us for the last couple of years. And the question of how close we are really rests with the American president and the extent to which he is willing to use his leverage. Now it is Donald Trump. Previously, it was President Joe Biden, to get the Israelis to accept a deal, not just in its first phase, but in all its phases. And we saw earlier this year, of course, a deal that was reached that the Israelis decided to exit from and back out of after the first phase. So, we have always been, looking at a very familiar formula here throughout the entire duration of the last couple of years. And it's been a question of, is there enough American will to press the Israelis to actually bring this genocide to an end?
Now, let's turn to France and the political turmoil there, because the French Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, has stepped down just hours after unveiling his cabinet, and barely 3.5 weeks into the job, the Élysée confirmed his resignation following a meeting with President Macron. Well, several parties in the French National Assembly had fiercely criticised the makeup of the new cabinet. They're now calling for fresh parliamentary elections. Lecornu, who was France's 5th Prime Minister in the last 2 years, blamed intransigence by the parties in the National Assembly for the crisis. Well, let's speak to Alexandre Kouchner, who's a French political analyst. And thank you so much for being here on BBC News. Did you see this one coming?
Honestly, not that fast. It took Sébastien Lecornu 27 days to come up with a cabinet that lasted 13 hours and 50 minutes. Even by French recent standards, that's quite the performance.
So what happens now, do you think?
Well, now it's all in the hands of President Macron. He has a few options. None of them are really good. He can ask someone to form a government. If he continues his bad habit of only naming someone from his own sort of deceased center coalition, the same causes will get you the same results, and we'll have to go at it in about a matter of weeks. He could ask somebody from another political party, probably the left, mainly the socialist. Problem, they don't have the votes either. The parliament is completely hung and they don't have a majority. So he could try to have a technical government, but that would only basically be gaining some time until the 2027 elections, as this government would not be able to pass any major laws. His last resort, which is the most likely, is to call for another snap elections. The problem there is that polls suggest that this would still result in a hung parliament. So basically, we would just again be adding more instability to the political crisis.
Yes, he of course had that snap election in July 24 that's caused all of these most recent problems as we roll through one prime minister after another, because it wasn't decisive last year. The trouble with new parliamentary elections, it would be like, for his party, Turkey's voting for an early Christmas, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The polls indicate that his party would actually be trashed in the elections. The only parties that would gain would be the leftist socialists and the far-right National Rally. But then again, the problem would not be solved, as we would still have a hung parliament. And the reality there is that we're facing sort of a regime crisis. There's only two ways out. Either you change the regime and you change the constitution, and that's not an easy task, or political French forces sort of grow up and turn into a more parliamentary system in which they can pass deals. Problem is, since this morning, we've been hearing from the left and from the right how this seems almost impossible.
The trouble also is they have that huge French deficit that has to be addressed, the national debt, the scale of it. That is causing problems on the markets. In terms of the options, you took us through some of them. Are there realistic options that somebody is able to grasp that nettle?
Well, the only realistic option would be if this new, fresh election were to build at least some form of a coalition so that they could get into an agreement just on a very basic few things that they can do until 2027. Because you're very right. The urgency for France now is not so much to have a government, it's to have a budget. France is running a massive debt, it's running a huge fiscal deficit, and it's on the verge of spiraling out of control. What it needs now is a plan, any plan, just to show that it's willing to tackle the problem. For this, it needs a government, and for this, it needs stability. The problem with that, as the French would say, is that right now, it is un peu le bordel, if you pardon my French.
So in terms of a brief final thought then, your assessment of are we likely to find a place that gives any sort of stability, or do you simply rule that out?
No, I think they will have to come to an agreement, even a minimal one, because the situation is quite dire. And then again, they are pressed by time. We need a budget. We need a plan. And there have been some moves here and there. I think at one point, the political representative will understand that the French themselves are extremely tired of this. They want one thing. They want political electees to do their jobs. And that will put huge pressure on both Macron and the political forces to come up with a budget, with a plan, and at least with a government.
Alexandra Kouchner, great to talk to you. Thanks very much. We will see in the coming hours and days whether we actually reach that place. We're going to take a short break now around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News. Welcome back to today's programme. Let's turn to those rescue efforts on Mount Everest, because more than 200 hikers are still stranded on the slopes after that powerful blizzard. 2 days of heavy snowfall have led to people being cut off from various campsites, and there have been cases of hypothermia kicking in and reports of tents also collapsing under the weight of the snow. About 350 climbers have already been accompanied down by rescuers. Let's get this report from our China correspondent first of all, Laura Becker.
The snow-buried tents so deep that hikers had to be dug out of their shelters. As the alarm was raised, the local fire service sent trained staff into the blizzard. Some even carried struggling casualties to safety. In the morning, snow had piled up around those who'd hunkered down. Hundreds of others had made their way downhill, step by step, wading through deeply covered paths. Their route had become unrecognisable. Only locals knew the way. And their yaks and horses helped carry equipment to those trapped. There was warm food and aid once hikers had finally reached the nearest village. This visitor, safely on the bus to Lhasa, said she was lucky to get out. The storm battered the Himalayas, triggering landslides and floods on the Nepalese side of Everest. Entire villages were washed away, and the army used helicopters to get to families as the waters rose. At least 40 people have been killed, and there are warnings the death toll could rise. Roads and bridges have been damaged, hampering rescue efforts. In a region used to storms, the severity of this one has come as a surprise even to seasoned hikers. In this video shared with the BBC, outdoor enthusiast Dong Shuchang documented his retreat from the mountain. As Tibetan locals gave him blessings, he told us this trip had taught him a lesson, that even after making careful plans, the weather around Everest is both unpredictable and dangerous. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Beijing.
Well, let's speak live now to Ritin Jangbu, who's a Sherpa, joins me live from Kathmandu. And thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News. I wonder if you could start by just describing how bad conditions have been over the last few days.
Oh yeah, thank you. It's been like even in the city in Kathmandu, it's been raining like 24 hours, 48 hours already. So basically, like
well, apologies. You can see our line to Kathmandu has frozen there. As I say that, I am told that the line has restored. You can see just a flicker of movement. Ritin, sorry to interrupt you, but our line failed us momentarily. Just tell me a little more. You were saying how bad the conditions were around the blizzard conditions, so tell me more.
yes, the connection is a little poor here.
Ritin, I'm going to have to apologise and come away from it. The line is clearly not stable enough to actually get any sort of decent answers from you. So apologies for that. Perhaps we will try again in the coming minutes. But the line there from Kathmandu failing us. Now, let's turn to the situation in France, where a court has been hearing an appeal against the conviction of one of the men found guilty of raping Gisèle Pelicot. Over 50 men, including Pelicot's former husband, were convicted of a range of sexual offences last year in the largest trial of its kind in French history. One of those convicted, 44-year-old Husmettin Dogan, told today's hearing he never intended to rape Gisèle Pelicot. He thought the sex was consensual. Well, our Paris correspondent Andrew Harding is outside the court for us.
51 men were, of course, found guilty last year of raping Gisèle Pelicot as she lay unconscious in her own bed. Today, just one of those men has taken up his right to appeal against that verdict. He is a 44-year-old builder named Hussein Matan, currently serving 9 years. He's argued forcefully last year, and will do so again, that what he believed happened was not rape, that he understood or felt that Gisèle Pelicot had somehow given her consent to what happened to her. Remember, of course, that Dominique Pelicot filmed each of those encounters. That video is almost certain to be played in court again this week. Dominique Pelicot, serving currently 20 years in prison, will also be here. And of course, much of the attention, as last year, will be on Gisèle Pelicot. Her lawyers have told us that although she didn't need to be here this week, she felt a responsibility to attend, as she did last year. Of course, famously talking about how it was not for a victim to feel shame, but rather the shame should change sides, and it should be for the rapists to feel that shame.
That was Andrew Harding. Now here, the Conservative Party conference is underway in Manchester, with the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride having outlined big cuts to public spending. He's promising that a Tory government would spend less on foreign aid and cut welfare payments, saving around £47 billion over 5 years. Well, the Shadow Chancellor also promised to scrap business rates for high street pubs and shops in England if the Conservatives win the next election.
Under Labour, many have seen their business rates double. We need to get business rates down. In fact, we need to go further, much, much further. So today, I can announce that as a direct result of getting public spending under control, a future Conservative government will completely abolish business rates for shops and pubs on our high streets. End of.
Well, that was Mel Stride. Let's go live to Conference Live to our political correspondent, Damian Grammaticus. Damian, over to you.
Matthew, thank you. Yes, so Mel Stride, you heard their Shadow Chancellor laying out those new Conservative policies he said would come into place after next election. We've also been hearing other new stuff on other areas that the party wants to reshape as well, including energy and climate change, which means I'm pleased to say with me is the Shadow Energy Secretary, Claire Coutinho. Just answer me one thing first. The scientific consensus on climate change has not changed, has it?
No, this is not about denying climate change. We think it's real. It's about questioning whether our plan is working.
But the plan we have is one that was put in place, or the plan that has been in place as a consensus, has been a Conservative and Labour thing going back to 2008, strengthened by Theresa May to achieve net zero by 2050.
Well, let me tell you what's happening at the moment and why we've got rid of the Climate Change Act. Because at the moment what's happening is you have a series of targets across the economy and it's making things more expensive. So at the same time as wanting people to use electric cars and electric home heating and requiring you to have bans to force them into it, it's also making ministers choose options which are going to make electricity incredibly expensive. Those two things are pulling in the wrong directions. So what we've said is our clear priority for energy policy, and we make no apologies for this, will be to make electricity cheaper. That's why I set out plans today to cut people's electricity bills by 20%. This is something that ministers could do tomorrow. That would be a much greater thing to do for decarbonisation.
But Boris Johnson said you shouldn't be ditching this. Theresa May, who strengthened it, she said it would be, I think, a catastrophic mistake, a retrograde step. You've got Conservative Prime Ministers saying don't do this.
I'm sure we will have people who will disagree with us, but the point is we have a choice now for our energy policy. We can either decide to squeeze every single last bit of carbon out of it, no matter the cost, and have even higher energy bills than we do now, or we could follow our path, which is to cut bills instantly for your electricity by 20%. And like I said, if you want people to adopt those things, making electricity cheap, we've got the highest electricity prices in the world. For us, it's got to be the priority.
You know very well, everyone says that, or sort of many who work in this field say the way to make electricity cheaper is to keep pushing for renewables. Having it tied to gas prices keeps it expensive. Even the man who led your climate change negotiations when your government, Alok Sharma, says that transition is what's driving change in the economy. You shouldn't be ditching it.
Well, let me just tell you some numbers. The current price of gas without the carbon tax is £55. The current price that Ed Miliband has said that he's willing to buy offshore wind this year is £117. And that's before you add in all the extra costs of grid and balancing and so on. So no, our priority, and again, I will come back to this, we are making a clear choice here. Our priority is to have cheaper energy. We want to see more nuclear. We've set up plans to make that cheaper. But there's also two things that we can do right now. We could scrap a carbon tax and we could scrap an old wind subsidy that's there, and we could cut bills by 20% right now, and that's what we think should be the priority.
You're chasing votes, aren't you? You're chasing people who are actually attracted by reform, and that's really what this is about, isn't it?
So reform doesn't have these policies. These are our policies. And the point is, do you think having the highest electricity prices in the world is a problem for the country or not? What you need to do after opposition is scrutinise where you went wrong and think about the biggest challenges the country faces. I would say having the highest electricity prices are one of the greatest challenges we face. That's why we've worked very hard to come up with policies that can be done now. This is not the £300 promise that Ed's made. This is not the £1,000 promise that Reform has made. Those are fantasies. They're on the never never. This is something that could be done tomorrow to cut people's energy bills, their electricity bills by 20%.
In a word, then, say, when you're saying admit when you get wrong, Theresa May got it wrong.
Yes, I don't think we should have passed that legislation. I think it's now to the point where it's ratcheting costs across the economy and for consumers, and I don't think that will have public consent. That's why we've said that we would repeal the legislation, and like I said, we'd have a single focus of our energy policy, and this is what we'll be doing until the election, is only looking at how you can make electricity cheaper. It's a huge problem for the country, and I think people should look at our policies on it.
Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. And that's one of the things being laid out here. Of course, much more we heard on policies to tax, immigration, and more to come in the next day or two.
Damian, thanks very much. Damian Grammaticus there, live for us at Conference. Now, 3 men who pushed, punched and kicked police officers during protests outside the Bell Hotel in Epping in Essex have become the first to be jailed for the disorder. Chelmsford Crown Court was told that 36-year-old Stuart Williams, 51-year-old Dean Smith and 33-year-old Martin Pegram were motivated by hostilities towards asylum seekers at the hotel after a resident was charged with sexual assault. Each defendant admitted violent disorder. They were given sentences of between 22 and 28 months. Before we take a break, let me bring you just the latest news from the US. It regards the Supreme Court, which within the last couple of hours refused to consider Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal. Well, there's been reaction from the family of Virginia Roberts-Giuffre, who say they're grateful to the Supreme Court for denying this appeal to invalidate her conviction. We are committed to ensuring that the convicted child sex trafficker Maxwell serves out the entirety of her 20-year sentence in prison where she belongs. We remain hopeful the DOJ will realise that she belongs in a maximum security prison, not the country club she was currently transferred to. So that the reaction from Virginia Roberts-Giuffre's family in the last few minutes after that news from the Supreme Court. I'm back in about 15 minutes. Business is here next on BBC News.
Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. Business Today.
A big deal. Chipmaker AMD's shares surge over 30% as OpenAI agrees to buy billions of dollars of its processors. A different story in Paris. Stocks sell off as France loses its second and shortest serving Prime Minister in less than a month. And surging sales, the UK becomes electric car maker BYD's biggest market outside China. Welcome to Business Today on a varied day on the markets with me, Mark Klobell. And we start in the US, where shares in the chipmaker AMD have surged over 30% today on news of a huge new tie-up with OpenAI. In a deal, the chat GPT maker OpenAI has agreed to buy tens of billions of dollars worth of AI processors from AMD. In turn, OpenAI will take a roughly 10% stake in the chipmaker over time. Let's speak to Michelle Fleury, live from New York. Michelle, just tell us what's just happened and why the deal is structured this way.
Yeah, I mean, this is really OpenAI kind of broadening its supply chain. So it was only a couple of days, weeks ago that we were talking about NVIDIA and OpenAI forming a partnership. Now they are forming another one with a rival chip maker, AMD. And that's important because it means that as OpenAI tries to sort of progress and build out what it sees as kind of future AI infrastructure, it won't be dependent on any one single company for these chips that are really the backbone of this technology that we all keep talking about. It guarantees that they will have access to a supply they need. And remember, you know, we saw during the COVID pandemic when supply chains get disrupted, sort of how much of a mess that can cause for businesses and the knock-on effect that has. This really is about trying to avoid any kind of problems in the future. So if one supplier doesn't have enough chips on hand or there's any kind of problem, they have that sort of diversity. The good news is obviously it kind of helps AMD in the race to try and catch up because NVIDIA is seen as the chip leader in the industry. And that is why you've seen this massive run up in AMD's share price, kind of having such a big order and such a big kind of tie up with OpenAI has propelled its share price up more than, 20%. At one point it was above 30%.
It's quite a tie-up, isn't it, Michelle? A big collaboration here between two AI giants or part of the infrastructure. But is this an AI bubble? From the outside, it looks like AI is almost feeding off itself.
Yeah, I mean, people keep saying, is this all going in a circle, right? You have business to business, sort of the company that's making the AI being invested in by the chip maker and vice versa. They're all sort of helping each other grow. Look, if you're the company, you will say we're just at the beginning of this build out. This ensures, as I was just saying, a kind of better system, more reliable system. But the skeptics look at this and go, hang on a second. At the point in which you're kind of seeing the pie grow because they're sort of investing and helping each other out, that's when people start to ring alarm bells and say, well, hang on, at least from an investment perspective, have we reached the peak for AI and for the kind of elevated share prices that we really have seen in this past year or so? I mean, I was talking to one equity analyst who is still a backer and a believer in kind of AI because he says it is just still at the infancy. So even though there are these concerns, he thinks that, look, we're still going to need so many more data centers, so many more, infrastructure that goes with it, that they're kind of optimistic this isn't a bubble.
OK, plenty of road to go, they say. Michelle, for now, from New York, thank you very much. To France now, where markets dropped by nearly 2% in early trading after Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's shock resignation today. The price of French long-term government borrowing rose and shares in French banks fell. Mr. Lecornu has quit after less than a month in office, saying the conditions for him to do the job were not fulfilled. The move plunges the Eurozone's second biggest economy into fresh political turmoil. He was the fifth Prime Minister in under 2 years. President Macron has been attempting to build a government able to pass a deeply unpopular budget in an effort to address burgeoning debt since calling a snap election last year. Well, Isabel Mateos Ilago is chief economist at BNP Paribas, which is France's biggest bank, and joins us from Paris. Great to have you on the show. Let's discuss France's fiscal handcuffs then. They can't afford what they're spending, but they can't cut it either. We've seen the pains over trying to get pension reforms through. So how are they going to drive through the change that they need?
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. Well, yes, I think what we French are figuring out is that without any political force having a clear majority in parliament, it's very hard to push through difficult decisions. And the developments of the last 24 hours are just an illustration of how our political system needs to learn to deal with this new reality. There is just no consensus broad enough on whether it's about cutting spending or raising taxes that will find enough support behind it. Now, talks appeared to be going in a constructive discussions direction until yesterday, but then of course last night everything fell apart over the specifics of the formation of the new government. But I would say what is still grounds for optimism is that very few, if any, at all parties are saying, well, we should just do nothing and the deficit doesn't matter. There is a wide consensus that the deficit needs to be addressed. It's just a matter of how.
Well, and also from the banking point of view, French debt is across European banks, and it's greater than everyone's debt other than Italy and Greece. It's very much the sick man of Europe, France, isn't it? So, I mean, that's becoming a big problem.
No, I wouldn't agree with this characterization, actually. And it's very unfortunate that we have this cloud and renewed cloud of political uncertainty and the inability of dealing with the deficit, because actually the French economy has a lot of good things going for it. Unfortunately, nobody's paying any attention, not even households whose confidence has been very weak. And so that has depressed consumption. But actually, we were seeing the beginning of a reacceleration of the French economy. Investment is still pretty dynamic. Investment in housing is also has been picking up. Business formation is growing, faster than last year. Employment is still pretty high, but this is all obscured by the inability to get on top of the fiscal situation. That's why it's important to really resolve this political uncertainty.
Isabel, thank you. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you. Okay, we're just pausing the business news now to take you live to Athens Airport. There's Greta Thunberg, who's been deported by Israel. If you've been following the story, she was on a flotilla heading to Gaza, and her and the other people surrounding her who are on the flotilla and other flotillas with her have been sent back via Athens Airport. And there you go. These are the live pictures now coming through of her reception there. You can see a large crowd and some Palestinian flags. And if we just listen in to what people are saying. Greta Thunberg there, holding her right arm aloft with flowers and getting a rapturous welcome in Athens. Again, after being deported from Israel, they're surrounded by supporters at Athens Airport. A number of other people have already come through that arrivals channel. Around 146 activists have come through or are coming through. Everyone waiting with great anticipation until her arrival, which, as we can see, is happening now. We're waiting to see if she's going to address the crowd there. Bit of a media scrum, as you would expect for her arrival after such a high-profile move towards Gaza. Every stage of her journey documented. We'll go back to that if she says anything a little bit later. But I just want to bring you to the UK now and back to business, where the latest numbers from electric vehicle giant BYD put the UK as its biggest international market outside of the Chinese mainland. Sales surged some tenfold last month compared to the same time last year, selling over 11,000 vehicles in September. Now, that's despite BYD missing out on a new UK government subsidy aimed at boosting EV purchases. Well, joining me now is Stuart Masson, editor of The Car Expert. Stuart, so here we are. These cars are cheap, they're selling fast, but are they impressive, these BYD cars?
Good afternoon, Mark. Look, the latest BYDs and a number of the other new Chinese brands that we're seeing on UK roads are very, very good cars. Whether or not they are better than what European car manufacturers are making or not, they are very much at the same level or a very similar level. They're certainly not sort of cheap, cheerful bargain basement, but a bit rubbish cars that people tend to assume they are.
Are we at a turning point? Because if we look at all the competitors, Nissan, JLR, we know about the cyber attack, BMW, Mini, they all have issues at the moment. Is this a trend, do you think, a turning point?
We are very much at the start of a new era in the automotive industry, and the Chinese car industry is very much in charge. About 1 in 3 new cars are made in China worldwide, and not just electric cars. They lead the world in electric cars, but they also build far more petrol, diesel, hybrid cars than any other country in the world. We just haven't really seen it until now, but most of the growth in the UK car market last month came from 3 big Chinese car companies. Most European car companies were down or behind the market.
You talk about growth in the UK market. I mean, the UK government wants this. It wants more battery-powered cars. And in fact, they're still falling short of their target, despite these subsidies for local car makers. So what else can they do to boost it?
The official target this year is for 28% of all new cars to be electric. That's a gross target. There are various allowances and loopholes in the rules that will probably bring that back to about 23%, which is roughly where the car market is right now. So the car industry will hit that target. It has to. It's mandated that it must. But we're pretty close to that mark now. The big movers in the market are the Chinese car companies. They are really growing at such a rapid rate. It's like having another Volkswagen in the market. The amount of cars that they are adding into the market is so huge, and that's really coming at the expense of some of the legacy brands.
All right, Stuart Masson, editor of The Car Expert, bringing us up to date with the battery-powered car market globally. Thank you for joining us on the show. Plenty more on all of these stories on the website, including the shutdown in America and that political and economic crisis, of course, taking place in Paris. Matthew will be back with all the news shortly, but for now, that's Business Today.
Every generation has to fight to maintain democracy.
There's a thrill in not necessarily following a straight line, do you know what I mean? Trying things that are different.
Women are still judged by a different metric, and certainly judged by a different metric when they do something wrong.
I will continue on with a life of public service, so I will always support the charities and the people that mean so much to me.
When the big names talk, they talk to us.
Welcome back to Verified Live. Now, the author Dame Jilly Cooper, famous for bestsellers including Polo, Riders and Rivals, has died at the age of 88. A statement from the Queen called her a wonderful, witty friend. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, described her as a literary force who shaped British culture. Our entertainment correspondent Colin Patterson looks back at her life.
1986.
Jilly Cooper's Rivals.
You can have whatever you want.
A huge multi-BAFTA nominated hit when it debuted on the streaming service Disney Plus last year. That familiar formula of the bedroom and the boardroom, sex, class and horses, themes which dominated her best-selling so-called bonkbusters.
The biblical.
And she even made a cameo.
You're a genius.
She'd grown up in the sort of world she wrote about, upper middle class, horsey, lots of boyfriends, up in Yorkshire. Her big break came in 1968 when, newly married, she was invited to write a column for the Sunday Times. The column and the books it spawned were groundbreaking at the time.
Don't worry too much about housework. If you amuse a man in bed, he won't worry about the mountain of dust underneath. I wrote that. I mean, it's probably quite true, isn't it?
Oh, now famous, she wrote a sitcom starring Joanna Lumley.
I think I've had a stroke.
About posh girls sharing a flat, the sort of life she'd lived herself in London. But it was fiction that made her fortune. She worked hard at it, often pretending to be shy and rather dippy. In reality, she was shrewd and tough, and needed to be. She and her husband Leo enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle, but when his publishing firm went bust, she became the main breadwinner for a time. She wrote 5 books in a single year. In the 1990s, he had a well-publicised affair. She was devastated. It spawned her most personal book, The Man Who Made Husbands Jealous. In 1999, she was lucky to escape alive from the Paddington rail crash. She climbed through a broken window and went to her scheduled meeting in London. This is where all those scenes came from.
Yes, all those scenes came from.
When I went to visit her at home in Gloucestershire last year, it was clear how much she was enjoying the late career success of Rivals.
How are you finding revisiting it?
Well, it's very lots and lots and lots and lots of sex. And I mean, it's just very, very, very advanced, really.
Are you shocked by your own book?
Slightly surprised. Did I write that?
The Queen has paid tribute, saying very few writers get to be a legend in their own lifetime, but Jilly was one.
Well, a look back at the career of Dame Jilly Cooper, her works and her life. Well, the television presenter Richard Madeley was a close friend of Dame Jilly. He paid this tribute.
The thing that always struck me when we met up with Jilly in recent years was how unchanged she was. She was one of those people who basically, of course, they get older, but at some fundamental level they don't age. And Jilly didn't age. She still had the same sense of fun, the same kind of ability to shock, the love of gossip, the kind of mobile, labile approach to life, flexible, funny, witty, modern, informed, hungry for gossip. She never changed. She never changed. You never left basically after a Jilly party or a meeting with her. Even when she was well into her 80s, you never left saying to each other in the car, she's showing signs of aging, isn't she? Because she wasn't. She remained Jilly Cooper, who kind of burst onto the literary scene and the journalistic scene in the 70s. She remained that Jilly right to the end.
Richard Madeley. Well, Felicity Blunt is a literary agent at Curtis Brown who represented Jilly Cooper. She said this about her friend and met her.
She was just wonderful.
We are all filled with grief, and I would say nobody more than her wonderful children, Felix and Emily, who have lost both the icon and the woman today. She was irrepressible, fun, generous, naughty. I'm sure you can all hear that in those clips. She had a laugh that was unlike anybody else's, and she was endlessly generous and appreciative of the work that people did with her and for her. I'm going to miss her every single day. It is a loss that feels it's almost too hard to quantify at this point. But seeing the love that has poured out for her in the last few hours has just been so heartening, and she would be watching us and clapping her hands with glee. She was very funny about it. She said, literary authors might love to have my sales and I might love to have their reviews, but in the end, I think I got the better half. But later in life, and over lockdown, those books surged and everybody was grabbing a bonkbuster to read as comfort. And actually, I think there has been an adjustment in how those books are seen, and people write about them with real respect. And I do believe she was sort of Austen-esque in her ability to dissect society and talk about class. She was asked very difficult questions a lot of the time about sex, about her own personal life, and she always dealt with them with such elegance and with such lightness of touch and with seemingly, no offence taken. I think she was formidable, and I think she was probably made formidable by having the love of Leo in her life. She adored him. They were married for such a long time, and I believe tomorrow would have been their wedding anniversary of some terrifying number. But she had that as a sort of rock in her life, and I think it made her untouchable.
When you come to Istanbul, there's one feature spread across mansions and mosques that's bound to catch your eye. It's everywhere.
These centuries-old miniature masterpieces, known as Iznik tiles, are the city's standout feature. And I think the underrated beating heart of a golden age of art, when Istanbul was the centre of the all-powerful Ottoman Empire.
Hidden away in the winding streets next to the spice market, the Rustem Pasha Mosque was built over 400 years ago by Miramar Sultan, daughter of the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent.
The impact of this place, just the wash of blue, that colour of nature, the seas, the sky, is so immersive. And then the fact that all the surfaces are just sparkling away. I feel like I am inside a gemstone.
The drive to create the Iznik tiles was top-down, driven by sultans who wanted to commission art that was worthy of an empire. But the innovations that developed the art form, as well as the creativity that made them, came from the artisans themselves. The tiles were made close to Istanbul, in the picturesque town of Iznik, that gave them their name. There's a pottery-making tradition here that goes back to Roman times. Centuries ago, artisans here had a technological breakthrough that made the art of Iznik possible.
Okay, this is where the real magic happens then.
Exactly. This is where we prepare the paste, which includes quartz, clay, and silicium, which is kind of like a clear glass. Iznik tiles contain up to 85%, which is the highest usage in the world.
Gosh!
The key is to actually the ratio of how much you put in and you mix them with.
Gosh, so they must have been experimenting, trying out different combinations to see what would give, I suppose, the most lustrous finish.
Exactly. He measured them perfectly, so it's like cooking, basically. It's the ingredients has to be in the right order and the right amount, so that the paste comes up in perfect form and shape.
What are the amounts?
Well, the amounts are a secret, and that's why we call it the glazing sır. In Turkish means secret.
You're not going to tell me?
But I can tell you off the camera.
Over the centuries, Turkish Iznik art was bought up and plundered, taken to museums and private collections around the world. In the 1990s, researchers rediscovered the recipe, lost for hundreds of years. Now, here at the Iznik Foundation, tiles are being made again. It's fantastic news for art lovers that these 16th century masterpieces are now getting a 21st century revival.
That is a work of art. Oh my goodness. You really see the full range of colours popping out, can't you? The greens, the reds, the cobalts. And I just love the details. Oh, it's gorgeous.
My dad was a farmer who worked for the government in New Zealand, but he also had a radio talk show for farmers. He'd patiently listen to every conflicting account of what was and wasn't working before reporting back. I was bored stiff by talk of yields and rotations, but that was really influential to how I approached my journalism. building trust by taking the time to understand a situation clearly before reporting a story. In a 24-hour news cycle, patience can be so frustrating, but it's a crucial tool. I don't rush to be the first. I strive to get it right. I'm Lucy Hockings on BBC News Now.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump urges mediators to move fast on his Gaza peace deal. The first indirect talks between Hamas and Israel started in the last hour.
And I'm Lise Doucette in Tel Aviv. I'll be speaking to Israel's ambassador to the United States to ask how optimistic he is that these talks will succeed.
We will also have the latest from our teams of correspondents, both in Jerusalem and live too in Washington. The Conservatives promise to abolish business rates for high street shops and pubs in England if they win the next election. More political instability in France as the Prime Minister resigns after just 3 weeks in office. Rescue efforts continue as more than 200 climbers remain trapped on the slopes of Mount Everest. And the Queen pays tribute to the author Dame Jilly Cooper, who's died at the age of 88. Hello and welcome to Verified Live. We start in the Middle East and those crucial talks aimed at ending the war in Gaza. It's being reported that indirect talks between Israeli and Hamas negotiators have begun in Egypt. The negotiations are aimed at trying to reach agreement on the US peace plan. President Trump has urged everyone involved to move fast. Well, the first phase of the plan involves the release of all remaining Israeli hostages and the release of hundreds of Palestinian detainees. So let's head to Tel Aviv and our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's there for us. Lise, over to you.
Yes, you join us here in what is now known as Hostages Square in the heart of Tel Aviv. It's very quiet, as you can see behind me. Almost no one in the square tonight. Today is the beginning of the Holy Jewish Festival of Sukkot, so Israelis are not gathering here today on the eve of the October the 7th, second year mark of the grievous Gaza war. But tomorrow this square will be filled with families of the hostages, those who've come home, and those who are still being held in the Gaza Strip. There's a big clock behind me in bright red letters, which marks how long it has been since the hostages were taken. 730 days, 13 hours, 30 minutes, 32 seconds. The families of the hostages, the vast majority of Israelis and many beyond, are daring to hope that this could be the week when the last of the hostages, living or dead, will come home. And many the world over, and most of all in the Gaza Strip, are also hoping that the suffering of Palestinians will finally ease, that the talks which have just got underway, the indirect talks between Israel and Hamas, will succeed, at least in the first phase. Let's bring in my colleague Barbara Paulette-Usher in Jerusalem to get a bit of an assessment about just how likely is the possibility that the hostages will be exchanged for prisoners and a ceasefire will come into force this week. How is it looking, Barbara?
Well, it's certainly possible, Lise. You have these talks started now in Sharm el-Sheikh in the resort of the Sinai. Indirect talks, as you said, Arab mediators shuttling back and forth. The Hamas delegation being led by Khalil al-Hayya, who the Israelis tried to kill last month. You remember he survived that Israeli airstrike on Qatar, and yet now here they are. So they have, both sides have expressed willingness or shown willingness to try to reach some kind of agreement on this first phase of Mr. Trump's plan, and they are basically looking at the technical details of how to do this hostage for prisoner exchange. So they're trying to work out the conditions on the ground as to where and how the hostages would be released. The Red Cross is standing by. Conditions for a ceasefire that would make this possible. Arrangements for how to retrieve the bodies of the deceased, because 28 of the hostages are thought to be dead, but it will take some time to find them because they are buried somewhere in the rubble of Gaza, and so arrangements need to be made for that. Then looking at the prisoner list, that will be quite tricky, Lise, because 250 of them are meant to be high-level or life sentence prisoners, and the Israelis see them as a severe security threat, whereas Hamas will really push for them because they'll be seen as the Palestinian resistance. So that will be a tricky one. But as I said, there is a willingness, I think, to achieve something here, and you have President Trump really demanding that be done, saying that this should be done by the end of the week. So that's an impetus behind them. When they get to the second phase, which has to do with very complex issues about the future of Gaza, that might be something else. But this does look doable at this point, although it will not necessarily be easy negotiations.
Barbara Plett-Usher, I know that you and many of our colleagues on our team will be keeping a close eye on these talks as they get underway. Thank you for joining us from Jerusalem. Well, as Barbara mentioned, what is new this time, and it's a significant element in the possible success of these indirect talks, is that President Donald Trump is now focusing on them, on ending the war, on bringing the hostages home in a way not been seen before, at least not since that ceasefire talks which succeeded earlier this year, which resulted in a ceasefire on January the 19th and some of the hostages being brought home. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel and Hamas are both under unprecedented pressure from President Trump to get the deal done now. Let's cross to Washington to join Israel's ambassador to the United States, Yehiel Leiter, who joins us now to give us his assessments of what's likely to lie ahead, but also his own personal reflections on the October 7th attacks and what has happened since then, the 2-year anniversary. Ambassador Leiter, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Liz.
Do you think these talks will succeed at least in this first phase? The last of the hostages, living and dead, will come home. Prisoners will be released, and there will be a ceasefire?
We certainly are full of hope and prayer that that's the case. I think it's important to remember where these talks are taking place, in Sharm el-Sheikh, in a place where Israel demonstrated its willingness to make concessions and sacrifices for peace. Sharm el-Sheikh was under Israeli control after the Six-Day War. We, in the context of a peace agreement with Egypt, returned all of the Sinai to Egypt. And we're willing to make concessions again for the achievement of peace, living in calm with our neighbors. But we cannot have a situation in Gaza where, or in any one of our borders really, where jihadis once again pose a threat to our civilians. We can't have 40,000 armed terrorists on our border. We're a tiny little country, and we simply can't afford to have that. Imagine that what happened in Manchester just the other day with one jihadi would happen again on our borders with 40,000 of those people who are willing to ram cars into people and stab them to death. So we're very hopeful that at least the first stage will be implemented, where we'll withdraw to an agreed upon line, which the president has promoted, actually tweeted the line itself, and where all the hostages would be released. And I think that would, of course, take place in the context of a ceasefire. So we're certainly very hopeful and prayerful that that's going to be the case.
Are you disappointed that President Trump has called for the bombing of Gaza to stop, even though it hasn't stopped completely? You've made it clear in many interviews with the media that you want to see the total defeat of Hamas.
Well, actually, within the president's 20-point plan, it's very clear that Hamas will not ever again reign supreme in Gaza. That's ultimately what we've set out as an agenda to achieve. The president has made it clear that that has to be the end game, that there is an international agency that will govern Gaza, be comprised also of Palestinian technocrats, but there's not going to be a situation where Gaza could once again become a Hamastan. For the people of Israel and for the people of Gaza, for crying out loud. I mean, these people have had suffering brought upon them by Hamas. And the only way that they're going to be free is if there's not a tyrannical regime such as Hamas reigning over Gaza. So we're very helpful. I think that what the president has asked us to do, and what we are indeed doing, is holding the line. We're not implementing large-scale bombing in Gaza City. Basically, we've implemented a unilateral stopping of the bombing to the extent that we need to hold that line. I mean, you can't just hold a defensive position. If you have the Hamas people attacking us, we're going to have to retaliate. Or if we see Hamas terrorists getting ready to attack our forces, we have to respond. So that's the minimum that we've reduced it to in the hope that these talks are successful.
You must be aware of all the reports in Israeli and American media about how furious President Trump is with Prime Minister Netanyahu, pushing him to accept this deal. You must have seen that yourself.
Yeah. I was also witness to all the reports during the course of the preparations for Operation Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer, where week after week there were reports in the BBC and CNN and other news agencies that there's terrible daylight between the president and the prime minister, and all the while the president is furious at the prime minister, it was a narrative that was adopted like contagion in the media and spread. It was simply fallacious. At the same time that narrative was being
But
spread.
you deny those reports, Ambassador Leiter?
Yes, I deny those.
You deny those reports?
Deny
that President Trump, that Prime Minister Netanyahu isn't happy that President Trump now seems to be listening to the Arab Gulf states about it's time for a ceasefire, time to put an end to the war before Prime Minister Netanyahu is ready?
No. The problem is that you've been party to a narrative that Netanyahu wants to perpetuate the war. It's all fallacious. We don't want to perpetuate the war. We want to end the war. We want to end the war with our agenda set. That is that Hamas cannot reign Gaza again. Look, I just participated in a lunch together with the Prime Minister. I sat next to the Prime Minister, right across the table from the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of State. There was no furious. There was no harsh language. We have the tremendous relationship with the Trump administration. There's a personal relationship between the Prime Minister and the President. And look, if journalists want to get caught up in these reports that add a little, sex appeal to reporting, that's fine. I guess it's all part of the media frenzy, but it's simply not true.
Ambassador Leiter, you sadly lost your eldest son, Moshe, in this war. One of your other sons who's also a soldier, was deeply traumatized. So you have suffered personally. How does that change your approach to what they described in what President Trump has in his 20-point plan about political horizon, so that Israelis and Palestinians can find ways to live together?
Well, obviously, losing my oldest son was very difficult. He actually was a commando for 15 years, went to med school at the age of 33, and was actually on October 8th supposed to assume his residency in one of Israel's big hospitals. October 7th, of course, changed his life, and he was called to immediately prepare troops to enter Gaza, which he did 3 weeks later. He led the troops actually into Gaza and was killed on the 13th day when he went together with his commando team, went into a booby-trapped shaft of Hamas and was killed. Another one of my sons was a soldier of his who was just 30 meters away and saw his older brother go up to heaven. And he does have some post-traumatic stress syndrome, but he's doing okay. We're all hopeful. Look, my other boys have done 300, 400 days of reserve duty. My sons-in-laws are officers as well. The family is completely invested in creating a safe and secure Israel. And that's really what this is all about. We don't want to extend a territory. We're not in a battle over a border. This is for the safety and security of the Jewish people of the land of Israel. We want to live side by side with our Arab neighbors, including the Palestinians. We want to reach a position where we could raise the Human Development Index for everybody, and everybody could live freely, not under tyrannical regimes or under terrorism. Look, the Palestinian community has to forego terrorism, really. What Arafat promised in Oslo in 1993 has not happened. They just paid lip service to abandoning terrorism, but at the same time supporting terrorism. So that has to.
But on both, yes, there will be. There'll have to be political compromises on both sides. You, of course, were part of the settlement movement. You lived in what is called internationally a settlement in the occupied West Bank before you became ambassador in July of this year.
I continue to live. Liz, I continue to live in Judea. And we refer to the area as disputed territories. We're not occupying somebody else's territory. The Jewish people were born in Judea, and we have a claim as the Palestinians have a claim. That's going to have to be meted out in negotiations. That's what we've been trying to do for many years. We'd like to negotiate a settlement there. I think we can reach a settlement over Judea and Samaria, over this disputed area. What the problem is, Liz, that what October 7th has revealed is that the real issue is not over Judea and Samaria, or what is colloquially referred to as the West Bank. The real issue that October 7th proved was the very existence of the state of Israel. And when the supporters of Hamas run through the streets of London or New York screaming from the river to the sea, they're not talking about Jewish settlements in Judea. They're talking about one big settlement called Israel. And that's something that we're not going to compromise on.
Ambassador Leiter, thank you very much for making time to speak with us. What is a busy day for you, and I'm sure quite an emotional, personally important day for you as well. Thank you very much for joining us from Washington.
It is, and thank you for having me.
Well, there's a view of the man representing Israel in the United States. Let's bring in Tom Bateman, our State Department correspondent, former Middle East correspondent. Tom, just give a broader reflection of the mood now in Washington. We heard Ambassador Leiter denying those reports, and there's been quite a few of them saying how angry President Trump is or how firm he is with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that has been a key element in at last moving this process forward. How does it look from where you are?
Well, Lise, if you want a very visual piece of evidence for how Mr. Trump, I think, has shifted and got frustrated and irritated with the Israeli Prime Minister, it was in a photo that the White House released last week publicly of Mr. Trump sitting next to Benjamin Netanyahu in the Oval Office while Mr. Netanyahu was on a White House phone having to call the ruling family in Qatar and apologize for Israel striking its soil when it tried to kill the Hamas negotiators and failed to do so, as we've been saying earlier this half hour. And then in the same week, Mr. Trump gave an unprecedented security guarantee to Qatar, which of course still hosts the political offices of Hamas, was interpreted in the Arab world as basically giving immunity to Hamas from Israeli strikes there. So the notion that Mr. Trump hasn't been irritated with the actions of his key ally, I think is clearly not supported by the evidence. He clearly has been. And I think in terms of the diplomatic shift, you have to remember where Donald Trump was at the start of this year when he stood up in the White House next to Mr. Netanyahu and said, I'm going to take over Gaza. The Palestinians will have to leave, although they deny it was a forcible transfer. But that was the clear idea here. They would sort of empty the territory and it would become the Riviera of the Middle East. This gave ground to the furthest fringes and extremes in Israel, the far-right settler movement, which is now a key part of Mr. Netanyahu's coalition, to believe that they then had an American green light to have an end-of-war scenario, which was basically Israel takes over the whole Gaza Strip, builds Jewish settlements. So that shifted the paradigms entirely from where the Biden administration had been at when it came to an end of war. And we've then seen, when that ceasefire, the early start of this year, the ceasefire collapsed, and the war, the ceasefire was then broken by the Israelis and the war then resumed. It has taken this long now to get to a point again where President Trump is re-embracing the idea of an end to the war and putting on immense and unprecedented pressure now. But that's because he has shifted position far closer now to what the Arab and Muslim countries wanted in terms of a post-war scenario. Getting there is going to be extremely challenging, and you've just been hearing many of the reasons why. For the Israeli side, they want guarantees about what stopping fighting will mean, and you've got Hamas also are going to be demanding American guarantees for what handing over the hostages is going to mean.
Yes, a lot of stumbling blocks ahead, but there is some cautious optimism that perhaps at least the beginning of this process can start. No doubt we'll be speaking to you, Tom Bateman, throughout this process. And across the Middle East, around the world, and in the United Kingdom, you're watching BBC News.
Welcome back to BBC News. Now, new video has emerged which appears to show the man who carried out last week's attack on a synagogue in Manchester. 2 people died during what Greater Manchester Police have described as a terror attack. Jihad al-Shami, who also died in the attack, is believed to be shown on this video, recorded on a doorbell camera a short while before the incident. He is walking right to left across the screen, then soon after, what's understood to be the same man is seen driving a black car in the other direction. We should stress there is no suggestion that any of the vehicles parked in the driveway nor anyone connected with the property is in any way connected to the attack. Well, Keir Starmer says he is appalled by a suspected arson attack on a mosque in Peacehaven in East Sussex. The Prime Minister's official spokesman said attacks against Britain's Muslims are attacks against all Britons and this country itself, and anti-Muslim hatred has no place in Britain. He also thanked the emergency services for their swift response. 5 crew were called to the mosque on Saturday evening. Police have released images of 2 people they wish to identify in connection